G'day guys, Mike with the Outer Circle, and today's episode we're going to be looking at the Death Guard. The Death Guard were the first Legion I properly collected for the Horus Heresy game, way back in 2012. And I had about 3,000 points of them completed by Christmas of 2012. And it was a lot of fun. Thing is, back then though, we didn't have a lot of options when we made our armies. We had whatever generic HQs were available, which wasn't many, and the really only Death Guard unit that we had available to us was the Death Shroud. So everything you see here actually all came after. Basically, we did have the Contemptor though, by the end of the year, but everything you see came after, which puts it in a bit of a weird place amongst Legions, because my memories of playing with the Death Guard was very much prior to them becoming what they are now. But anyway, let's get into it. So, first up, we have the old school head upgrades, and I really liked these. I felt that the Sergeant's helmet was weirdly different to the others. It made no sense why it was the shape it was when every other helmet's identical, and why that was the sort of option they came up with. I think something like 3 spikes on the helmet, like 3 is in like the Nurgle magical number type thing, might have been something that they could have done, but it was fine. I liked this headset, and in fact the bear head in this looks really sickly. Like the eyes are sunken right back into it. It's almost like a skull that you're sort of viewing, seeing in this. So yeah, I really liked this upgrade set, but there wasn't much to differentiate any of these heads. They're all exactly the same as one another. And they were very brittle. It was very easy to snap the spikes off the helmets. Now, I consider the Mark 6 upgrade set here to be 2 things. First, it's not Mark 6. This is the new Mark 3 helmets. And because of that, they work. And I think they're good. That's the other thing I think they are. I think they're good. This is not a bad bear head in the set, but I prefer the old bear head more. These helmets, though, I do really like them. The problem is, though, because the new Mark III helmets pretty much look like this, these don't really bring much to the table as an upgrade option. Something else had to be done with them to differentiate them, I think, from the stock Mark III helmets we're seeing coming up. Maybe some sort of like gas masks filters coming off the helmet would have been really cool. Look back at those old, like, 3rd edition era Plague Marines and artwork from 40k, and use that as sort of the go-to, or the original plastic Death Guard sculpts of 40k, way back when, the monopose ones, with the big beer belly body armor. That is probably the direction I think they should have gone in, and they didn't. So, whilst I like the set, it doesn't offer us a lot in the current environment. I guess the only thing that marks these out as apparently being Mark 6, despite having no trademarks of Mark 6, is the tiny little sensor on the top of the helmet. So, yay! And the choice of the little skull in the spike on the Sergeant, yeah, I think that's a good choice. It's a good stylistic choice. So, yeah, thumbs up for both sets, and I recommend them. Then we go to the Death Guard Power Scythes. They're a cool weapon. And if you're happy to use the old arms, they will work on your new plastic models, which is good. They're scythes. There's not an awful lot to say here because the Death Guard are very utilitarian. That means that their equipment does not have a lot of flashiness about it. There's not big sections of gold trim and filigree and gemstones and stuff. It's just a stick with a blade. And you know what? Pretty much identical here as it is on the Death Shroud, and it works really well for it. The only downside here is that you don't get many. You get 4 scythes and 1 for a Terminator. So 4 for power armor and a single 1 for a Terminator. It just feels like it's lacking something there in quantity, because if I had to arm whole units with these scythes, which is an option under certain circumstances, I would need to buy, 5 sets of this maybe, and that's a lot of money. And yeah, just not ideal, right? Then we go to the Contemptor, and this, after the World Eater's Contemptor Dreadnought, was my second favourite in the game. Just had a right mix of everything. The helmet looks like a Mark II/Mark III style of helmet on the Dreadnought. The original shoulder pads had a very tasteful trim. You have obviously the studs in the sort of surface of the chest and the cabling and the bits of damage and wear and tear, which is all very utilitarian, very Death Guard. The old arms and legs as well. The legs had like Mark III cutouts in the back of the leg armor. It just very much replicated the look and the style of the Legion that it was supposed to, and it is still my second favourite Contemptor Dreadnought, right after the World Eater's Contemptor Dreadnought, which is of course the best. Then we go to the Death Shroud. Now these guys, okay, they're starting to look a little bit small. They're still a decent size, but they're starting to feel a bit small. They've been power crept and height crept throughout the editions, but they're in a pretty good place in 2.0. Very resilient, especially with Psyker support. I know many people who run 2 to 3 Psykers in their armies, including Danny, for example, loves a Librarian Callous Typhon comboed with Death Shroud, and it becomes a very powerful Death Star. Because Strength 6 attacks when you're knocking people down to Toughness 3, yeah, you can do the math. They've obviously been height crept by things like the new Indomitus Terminators. The new Indomitus heads sit at the height of the top of these guys' torsos, so they're a whole head shorter. That's a Games Workshop problem. They just constantly scale creep everything, and it sucks for those of us who would like to include all these different armors into our armies, because now, you end up with choices like, oh, I've got to go to Tortuga Bay, or whatever it might be, and try and find the appropriate armor types. But I love these original Death Shroud. They are some of the best models that they ever put out. Because you can tell this is clearly Tartarus Power Armor, and yet, or Tartarus Terminator Armor, sorry, but it is clearly different. And it's not just like the Ebon Kashyyyk, where it is stock armor, where they just added the armor plates on the thighs. These guys have different hoses and cabling. They've got studs on the shoulder pads. They've got the Besicues, those little round shields you see here on the armpit, attached to the shoulder. There's melter bombs, rad grenades, there's flamers mounted into the wrists, as well as the weapons. And unlike the Ebon Kashyyyk, these are multi-build miniatures. You can build any torso on any set of legs with any combination of arms that you like. And different helmets. Which again, new sculpts don't have that. These allow you to do somewhere in the vicinity of let's think, just between torsos and legs alone, you have 20 different options of pose, basically, or 20 different options of combination, let alone pose, of the amount of torso and leg. Alright, I want to put this one with this one that you can do. Then you have another 20 poses again, if you want to go through all different helmet combinations and arm combinations. So you end up with hundreds of different available permutations of this same unit, which is really cool. And they make great looking characters, or lesser characters, command squads, things like that. So yeah, I'm gushing because I love the unit. And again, this is the sort of stuff we got back in 2012. Okay, so 11 years ago, this was considered to be the normal sort of fare that we got in Horus Heresy units, because this was the second Terminator unit released for the Horus Heresy. The Justirian was the first. I suppose technically the Cataphracti, stock Cataphracti that is, was the first, but out of Elite Legion Terminators, this was the second. And so this was setting the goalposts, the benchmark that everything that come after had to be measured against. And look at how plain and simple these are, and then compare that to something like the Inner Circle Knights Cenobium, and just how over-the-top, ostentatious, and rather they are. And yeah, what winners. And then they one-up that with the next book, because they gave us the Grave Wardens, which are another fantastic Terminator sculpt. And what can you say? This is taking Cataphracti, but changing things about. They rounded off the kneecaps. They gave them more gold trim in different locations as well. And this is starting to look almost like Chaos Terminators in 40k. And it's like, okay, I can see the direction that this is headed in, what the end goal of this process will be for this Legion. It's those nice little telltales of what is going to come later on. And of course, they're a lovely kit. I just never liked the grenade launchers on them. It was cool that they did this approach of like, oh yeah, chemical weapons and such, but the grenade launchers always had funky rules that I wasn't a big fan of. And okay, they couldn't make them rad grenades because a whole unit of like 10 rad grenade launchers would just be insane because you take 2 units of them and just wipe all the power armor off the table. But as they were these sort of strength 6 grenade launcher frag things, they were good. They were solid. I just wasn't the biggest fan of them. As kits, though, I love them. I think they're a fantastic kit, with the caveat that they're kind of hard to convert because the arms have this sort of shredded cloth with chain dangling over the top of them. And that means that regular Cataphractii arms with their leather strapping, well, it's very hard to match them up because you can't just throw a whole arm on. You have to cut an arm at the elbow joint and swap the parts out, which can be a frustrating endeavour if you have to do a bunch of it. So it does mean that there is some reduced utility in the unit in that regard. But apart from that, they've got the Destroyer Hive, the pre-Destroyer Hive, just the chemical emitters in the top of their armour that gives them this sort of pseudo-flame attack if you go and charge them. They have all the chemical rebreathers and filters built into the chest, which again, it's a nice telltale of where the unit's at, as well as the old school sort of frowning, leering skull icon on the Besigus, on those little shoulder shields, which again, it's very winking and nodding back to old school miniatures, to what has come before, paying homage to the classics. And, of course, they've got these really neat little belt buckle type things with the crossed sides of the Legion in there. So, yeah, another fantastic unit, and I really do like the Grave Wardens. Then we get to the Death Guard Legion Praetors, and apart from needing the cloak on it, I really like this. It goes to show a good blend of the Imperium and, obviously, the Death Guard's own design aesthetic. Now, the chainmail is just so regular and orderly and kind of chunky on this when you compare it with the Death Shroud. Okay, let's see if I can get an individual Death Shroud kind of semi-up close. See how the chains all sort of dangle in slightly different directions? You know, because these models have movement. As they're moving on, the chains move and rustle and jangle about. Right? This doesn't have that. This is very artificial. So, the little details like that, they always stick out to me, especially the newer sculpts every single one of them is bad for this. And that's because of the computer design elements versus the hand sculpting elements versus, you know, do the sculptors want to take the time to make sure that all of these things have, they're carried in the same momentum, the same direction? Maybe not. But anyway, the model as a whole is really nice, and I like that this icon on the belt buckle basically looks like a destroyer icon. So it's, you know, it's a bit of symbolism there, a bit of symbology, which is great. This weird trim on this Mark III shoulder pad, I'm fine with it. It works for me. The power scythe being held in that one hand, I actually don't mind it, because if for some reason you do want to change out the weaponry on this model, it's very easy to cut the hand off at the wrist or cut the arm off just in front of the elbow to put a power fist on. It's one of the few times this actually kind of works, and despite all the circumstances. I don't know why he has the quad nacelle backpack. That's sort of something that was usually only reserved for Primarchs, but, you know, it works. It looks good. And the little chemical emitter on the back, that looks good as well, as does the fact that he has this, you know, snouted helmet, which I like. It's very Death Guard. So overall, this one gets a pretty good pass. The only thing that lets it down is this is a Death Guard miniature. It's weathered, it's worn, it has barbaric chainmail and such. Why does he have such a flawless, perfect cloak? The cloak, to me, should be tattered. it should have damage to it, like bolt gun rounds have ripped through it in points, and it's been caught on, different thorns on the battlefield and barbed wire and entrenchments, and they've damaged the cloak, and the paint job obviously has to be, it's dirty, it's tarnished, it has dried flecks of blood on it, and, chemical burns and all this sort of stuff. But instead, it's just this really, really nice cloak. And that doesn't fit the character of someone who has this just horrible bandage wrapped around his the haft of his scythe as a gripping material. It's like the two styles clash. But yeah, I'm not a cloak on many. I'm not a fan of cloaks on many of these characters, I should say. I'm getting dyslexic in my old age. And yeah, I also like that he's got the little arrow on the gold trim on this forearm. Like that vambrace there with the arrow, that's getting very Chaos Space Marine. So again, tells you where they're headed as a Legion, which I like. Then we get to this guy, who is straight out of 40k. Well, that's actually a bit harsh. He's not as bad as a 40k Death Guard miniature, because on the whole, I really don't like the 40k Death Guard miniatures, because they don't symbolize the Death Guard. They symbolize Nurgle's more, how do I put this, benevolent characteristics, when the Death Guard are all about, they're grim reapers. They're grim, stern of face, featureless, angry and spiteful and resentful of what they have become, because they feel that they succumb to weakness. And the 40k Death Guard are everything but that. And this guy's not terrible, but why does he have just this jangling brazier on a hose? Just adds nothing to the model, and you think, imagine having that on your armor. Just a small, basically, ball and chain, just dangling off your chest, slapping into your legs everywhere you walk. There'd be no paint left on him, The part would probably break and snap the conduit off, and it just makes no sense. So it adds nothing aesthetically to the model. He doesn't have a destroyer hive or anything like that, and the leather sort of covering over his head, maybe you could say, that harks back to like some sort of medieval cowl. Maybe it just looks like some of the 40k Death Guard kits do, and I'm not the biggest fan of them. Now, the Terminator armor, on the whole, I'm pretty okay with. Like, it looks fine, it's passable. The axe. Why does he have an axe that is as wide as it's wider than his torso? It's just this massively oversized axe. Didn't need it. It would have been more thematic to give him the scythe of his Legion, or give him something else like a power fist or a chain fist, something like that. It's just a grossly oversized, comically large weapon, and it makes no sense. Oh, and speaking about like the chainmail and such on him before, look at this chainmail on the upper arm here. Okay, it is hanging down perfectly perpendicular, despite the fact that gravity should be making all the change slump to the rear, slump over the back of his arm. Chains are heavy, right? Gravity has a marked effect on that stuff. You notice it should all be slumped over onto one side. And he's walking forward, he's stepping forward towards, like on this angle, stepping towards the viewer. Why is all the chain on his arms just dangling perfectly downwards? Again, it has mass, it has weight to it. All this stuff should be swinging away and billowing in the breeze, as it were. And none of that is being sculpted into the miniatures. It's a real problem with the newer Games Workshop stuff. Same thing as the other Praetor, doesn't have the damage to the cloak, and I think it really should. And I never really saw Death Guard as big cloak wearers anyway. I know Mortarion has one, but we never really had cloak descriptions on any of the other characters. So I'm very mixed on my feelings towards them. I like the little things like the cabling, the Auspex, the chainmail, again, looks, all that's great. The more refined use of things like the gems, that's good. The gold trim on the vambraces, the forearm armor with the arrows, totally cool with that. Looks good, suits them. It's just, yeah, there's things I would like to see changed. And this is definitely just use the head, use the helmet head on the model, or better yet, put in something like, this head, the bear head back here, put that on him. It'll look far nicer. And I don't get the symbolism of like this half skull in the axe. It just does nothing for me. So yeah, that's that model. Let's move on now to Callus Typhon. Perfect. This one is not doing the Saturday Night Fever boogie dance of Callus Typhon in 40k. It doesn't have spooky shit and smoke billowing out of everywhere. It's just a dirty Cataphracti Terminator. He has the helmet, but much more subdued than what it will become. But you can clearly see that helmet screams Callus Typhon. He's got the Man Reaper, and it is this gnarled old stick. I think this was another Edgar Skoromowski sculpt. I believe this was as well. Who's probably my favourite all-time Forge World sculptor. Shout out to you, Edgar. Yep, the Destroy Hive on the back, ready to just spill and billow out those noxious clouds. And again, they're not giant coral wreaths or anything like that. They're these almost like distilleries of copper piping that's all been buckled in, included, and he's got them in the legs. So you've got these gas tanks that, and they have these external hoses. All the stuff is externally added to the armor to billow out the smoke. And, you know, it's got the 3 dots in there, which is starting to echo the Nurgle symbology, the Nurgle iconography that's going to come later. It looks really, really good. His base also matches Mortarion's base quite well, which is good if you want to use them in the same army and you have their display bases and such. Great, works well. And he has a really nicely sculpted bare head as well, which it suits. It suits him quite well with this sort of wispy beard that he's got going on. And what a great entry into the character series. Just very, very, exactly that. It's characterful. You know, you look at this and you think, yeah, that is Callus Typhon. So good on him. And then we have, to round it out, Mortarion. I'll get it out of the way straight up. Yep, I too am disappointed that he does not have his famous breathing mask. That said, he does have the smile of a 40-year-old British hooker who smokes 40 cigarettes a day. So that brings a warm feeling to my heart. No, I really like this miniature. This is one of those ones where you've got it in your hands, it's very enjoyable. It does not photograph particularly well, just because of the pose. The way that parallax error occurs, and when we're using a camera and we're looking at the miniature, all of the parts that we're trying to keep in focus in the foreground suddenly look very, very close to us. So his hands look like they're the size of power fists because they're punching towards the camera lens. In real life, it's much better proportioned than that. It works really, really well. It looks great. Little touches on this model I like is this is Mark III armor, but it's also Terminator armor. So it's a sort of combination of Cataphracti and Mark III, and very much is called Cataphracti Terminator armor. Of course, he forgot that he wore this armor when he became a Demon Primarch, but that's another story. Let's hope that he gets the Demon Fulgrim treatment and a really sick 30k Demon model, perhaps. The Lantern, really interesting pistol design. This sort of almost looks like a 1950s ray gun, which I really appreciate. And unlike this character who has the random ball and sort of chain happening here, Mortarion has it as well, but it's on the back of him, and it's hanging off the sort of Alchem distillery backpack. That makes a lot more sense, because hanging things behind you is very different to hanging them off the front of you, where every time you take a step, your leg swings up and into it. It works better. Also has all of the little pipes, releasing the noxious gases in front of his face. And yeah, it just screams character, this miniature does. And that's not something we can say for a lot of others here. And actually, to point it out, I'll go back a few pictures here. Look at Mortarion's cloak. The edges all along his cloak are frayed and tattered. It's damaged, it's not perfect. And where it covers, he has bits of cloth that cover the shoulder armor. The cloth is tearing away in patches, and you can see it, the armor underneath exposed next to these sides, where the cloth has been ripped and torn asunder. And, it's got these little micro tears in the fabric. You see here underneath the skull icon, there's another tear in the fabric. Again, contrast it to these two characters who have perfect cloaks, okay? So this is the difference between someone who has reached the height of the game with their sculpting, and that's not to say, I'm not trying to tease the sculptor. That's just the improvement I would make on these models. Give them a more tattered cloak. That would suit the character of the miniatures and the Legion better. It tells you the story better. This is someone at their A game when it comes to sculpting, though. And Mortarion is gorgeous, and all those little details. And, the pipes, actually, all these pipes that make up his base, that speaks to, with Callus Typhon, the same sort of thing. But it's like these are these sewer pipes and chemical treatment plant pipes. It's something about them that just, once they've had a really strong, say, coppery paint job on them and all this oxidization, it just feels like it's pumping toxic chemicals. It really adds to the Primarch, which, you can't say something like that about, say, Perturabo's base with that giant knight. Yes, his base is more impressive than just some broken concrete and a bit of copper tube, but this has more character to it. It suits the Legion better. Perturabo, for example, should have been stepping over broken trenches and fortifications, not a busted knight. That sort of muddy attritional warfare with skulls piled up around him and the horrors of war. That suits Perturabo's character, but a knight chassis didn't. This suits Mortarion's character. The crumbling, rusting, decaying remains of some part of a city somewhere, or a treatment plant of some kind. This mechanical breaking down into the earth, being buried and rotting away, that's very Death Guard. And yeah, so on the whole, this is a range where every kit, I like it, and I just have my nitpicks along the way. The things that's like, hey, this is a 90%, it could have been a 100% if they did this or this change. And that's pretty rare. So it's been really great to go back and see this Legion, and I think many of the Legions have been like that, really, where it's like, this is great, this is great, this is great. And funny enough, it's all the older ones that really perform. And there could be a bias there, for sure, because, I don't know, maybe I've got really fond memories of the stuff that was around back then, but also I think the quality does show. Because we're able to do side-by-side comparisons, like with the Emperor's Children, go, look at the Phoenix Terminators, now look at this new Terminator console. Which one of these is 10-year-old technology and yet somehow better than the other? And I think it's plain as day. And the Death Guard, they're one of the ones where the new stuff, these new characters, they work, they blend in. Yeah, okay, they're painted a bit differently and such, but, they've got a few flaws in the sculpting, but they fit in, they work. But maybe you want to do a couple of things to make them a bit better. Anyway, that's it for me. I'm Mac with the Outer Circle. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you on the next episode.